of knowledge, technology, and inclusive development. We've had wonderful, partnerships since then, impacts on policy, creating a great community, and a series of research publications and policy impact that I'm very proud of. In particular, two cases I would just take a few, seconds to highlight. Our work on software industry made it to policy, our open source software. I was asked to write the strategy for Egypt that was announced as is in 2014, and research that I have done with the team on Uber drivers in Egypt was quoted in the official gazette when the regulation of the Uber drivers was done. So these are two success stories. I'm very proud of the work that we do. We have our partners. Time will not allow me to acknowledge the support of each and every member of the team and the partners, and of course of the School of Business and Dean Sharif Kamel in particular. But I just wanted to highlight that we've been very active over the last 10 years. So, happy anniversary A2K4D, and for 10 or 20 more years to come. Having said that, let me move on to my opening remarks for this session. On January 14, 2016, Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum wrote, "We stand on the brink of a technological revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to one another. In its scale, scope, and complexity, the transformation will be unlike anything humankind has experienced before. We do not yet know just how it will unfold, but one thing is clear: the response to it must be integrated and comprehensive, involving all stakeholders of the global polity, from the public and private sectors to academia and civil society." So we teach the students first, second, third, and now fourth industrial revolution, starting roughly the 2000s, and it is a fusion of technologies that is blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres. The velocity, scope, and systems impact is incredible. We often hear keywords like disruptive technology, artificial intelligence, the cloud, exponential increase in productivity, disruption of jobs, the future of work, knowledge and human talent. We were having this discussion earlier as the top asset, lower barriers between inventors and markets, 3D printing, robotics, Internet of Things, etc., etc., etc. So this is, why we are here. The fourth industrial revolution offers tremendous opportunities, just like the digital technologies before and the previous revolutions, but also many challenges, many promises, many perils, some global and perhaps generic challenges and opportunities, but also context matters, and some are very specific to our context as the MENA region and actually Egypt in context while we are here. Again, this work sort of puts together under the umbrella of 4IR MENA the work that we have done at the Access to Knowledge for Development Center, working with different partners. In particular, the area where I come from, and my remarks are based on a chapter that I wrote and that's coming out this spring for the Oxford Handbook of AI Ethics, looking at AI and inequality, the political economy of inclusion in the Middle East and North Africa. So in doing this kind of work, I learned a lot. Clearly, it is a multidisciplinary area. I mean, people around the table who I welcome warmly, and everyone in the room, each comes with his and her area of expertise to contribute to the discussion. So in that sense, basically what I have found is the conclusions for the MENA region. The MENA region is not homogeneous. It's not one thing. Clearly, context will differ from one country to the next. But what the region has in common is that it is predominantly youthful, the predominance of youth. The population pyramid is very clear when you look at countries of the region. High rates of unemployment of youth, the educated, graduates of universities who are unemployed, women, unemployment of women, informal employment, informal housing, informal dwellings. The informality as a characteristic is in different countries of the region, including the more affluent ones. Poverty, multifaceted inequality of opportunity, a digital divide, and political turmoil sometimes. Amidst all of this, looking at the conditions of the region, where does data fall into this? Data is, when the problems of data capturing what is happening in the region, what you end up having actually with data that feeds into the AI systems for policy, there is a lot of, there is deficiency with respect to the data. What I call data blur, data blindness, There's quite significant portions of these economies do not exist as far as the official data is concerned. And if you feed biased data into biased algorithms that come with already their black boxes, you end up having biased policy implications. What does that mean for inclusion, for equality or inequality? There is asymmetry in the ownership of data between large companies, if you will, or ownership by the state, and small, we talked about entrepreneurial, small players, small entrepreneurial initiatives. We look at enabling environments, the infrastructure, but in the end, it all boils down to people. And the challenges that face the region, just like with other digital technologies, are the tensions between the capability of the technology to move out of the center, to encourage new entrepreneurs, small player, voice of the small player in the market, and top-down tensions, sort of large establishments perpetuating themselves as well. May that be large multinational companies or actually the role of the state. So you have those two forces happening at the same time, and that is the tension with the digital economy. It's just becoming more pronounced as well within the fourth industrial revolution. Also, the threat of technological determinism. Just because we have technology does not mean everything will be nice and dandy. What else is needed? Technology may be necessary, but not sufficient. What else is needed to achieve the desired objectives? But in the end, really, having a youthful population with a mismatch between the need for work, the job opportunities and the capabilities, there is a clear vacuum there. And as I was saying earlier, you have the population pyramid, the demographics, you have a problem with youth who are unemployed, you have a problem with the skills, the building of skills within institutions, problem of them finding work, you have the brain drain because the clever ones are taken either by, outside by large companies, either actually abroad in the global north or in more affluent countries of the region. So you end up with less fortunate countries who are actually falling behind in their capabilities. And at the end of the day, what actually happens is that the biggest challenge, in my opinion, is the demographics of that region and the repercussions, the potential political repercussions coming from this. And this is actually something that we have witnessed and we continue to witness as we go. So in that sense, I think very quickly I give a quick sort of overview of where I come to this topic from my area of research without getting into details of figures, etc. So just to, to wrap it up, the biggest challenge, and this is what I'm asking everybody to think about, the biggest challenge for this region, in my opinion, is those tension between those two forces happening at the same time, and where the youth falls in this story, where the youth, the women, and the educated who are not finding the real opportunities, how can we turn things around using the technologies to empower the less fortunate or the marginalized, if you will. So with that, I will yield my time, and I will ask, Utkarsh, my colleague and guest who works at Microsoft and is founder of Network Capital, one of the world's largest peer mentoring and career navigation communities. I think my cue to you is I'm talking about the youth and the skills, and so maybe I will ask you, please, to give a few comments from your end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nagla. I hope I'm audible. Yep, perfect. So I just wanted to take my allotted time to share that where we are sitting right now, India, Egypt, and many parts of the Middle East have very similar challenges and very similar opportunities. So both by 2030, both India and Egypt would be among the top 10 global economies. But this is, of course, not a given. There are many things that can go wrong towards that dream. But let's try and compare India and Egypt as they stand today. What makes us common right now? So our internet penetration is very similar. India is about 35%, Egypt is about 35% as well. Where India makes a sudden departure is that in the past, say, 5 years, we've got millions of more people online. It's been one of the fastest growing internet nations in the world. And I think that's something that Egypt can take some inspiration from. But as on date, the percentage of population is very similar. The GDP per capita is very similar. It's around, Egypt is $2,400, India is $2,000. The literacy rates are comparable. The educational challenges are very similar. I looked at, with the help of some of the Arabic speakers, I looked at the textbooks in Egypt, and I looked at some of the textbooks in India. And I thought that in both countries, there's a lot of emphasis on what. What is the speed of light? What is this? What is that? In the world of AI, nobody cares about what. You can find these answers online. It's the why and the how that we need to figure out. So both India and Egypt today struggle with not being able to repivot education. And I think from what I understand, AUC is taking steps in the right direction, but it needs to start in school. And we all keep talking about the demographic dividend. So both India and Egypt and many other parts of the Middle East have what you call the demographic dividend as a given right now. A lot of young people hungry. But the demographic dividend can easily become a demographic time bomb if you don't act now. And I think what are some of the challenges that can make a demographic dividend becoming a demographic time bomb is if there are lots of unemployed youth, as we see in Egypt right now, and they are not essentially matched with jobs with a purpose, or they're not able to create jobs with a purpose. The unemployment rate in India is around 6%. In Egypt, to the best of my knowledge, it's twice that, perhaps more. And we need to be able to fix these things, and I feel that AI has a very strong role in not just providing a job, which is, by the way, nothing to be too proud of, but a meaningful job. People, often historians in Davos and others, talk very prolifically about everyone should have a job. I think everyone needs to have a job that makes a difference, because in the age of AI, there will be a lot of consumer surplus. And when we talk about disruption, the only thing that the machines won't be able to disrupt are things that make humans unique. So they call what you call a Moravec's paradox, which is the things that humans are very good at, machines tend to be very bad at, and vice versa. So we should be able to leverage AI to work for us. And here I want to talk about three very specific things. One is, given the state of our affairs, what are our shared problems? Second is, what will be the nature of jobs in the future? And third is that how do we really create an ecosystem where purpose and opportunities can be matched using AI? So what are our shared problems? I think when we look at AI, India has a national AI strategy. I'm given to understand that Egypt also is coming up with parts of the AI strategy. But I really hope that all countries in the world don't come up with, don't build walls and firewalls, because in the world of AI, you need to collaborate, share data, and come out with predictions that solve problems for the world. It's all well and good to solve problems for your own country, but things like climate change, technological disruption don't know boundaries and barriers. You should be able to figure out a way to solve problems, not just for your country, but for the world at large. Same for things like income inequality and income as such. Both India and Egypt, the GDP per capita is quite low. So if you want to augment it, how do you do that with the help of technology? Have the governments figured out? And I think one concrete suggestion that I'd like to advance on the table is to have some entrepreneurs from the countries that face similar challenges work with each other, academics, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and not just leave things at theory. Everyone knows in principle what needs to be done, but how does it very specifically translate it on the ground is something that we need to be really important. Look, the second point I want to talk about is the jobs. Everyone knows that 90% of the jobs by 2030 will be disrupted. It's a fact that is bandied about left, right, and center. But what does that actually mean? It means that 9 out of 10 people here will have to change the nature of their job, and this is much easier said than done. To be able to do that, you don't just need to take a course on Coursera. You need to be able to have a lot of mental and spiritual resilience to be able to reinvent yourself multiple times. As I was sharing yesterday, I graduated from INSEAD 5 years back. A lot of the case studies that I studied in class today, at that time Netflix was sort of something, and today it's a multi-billion-dollar company. Whole business model has changed. So in the era of AI, I think all of you might know about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, but the thing that I'm most passionate about is community as a service, CAS. I'm a part of a few communities like the World Economic Forum Global Shapers. I've set up my own network capital as a community, and I have a lot of hope from such communities coming together and using artificial intelligence to be able to match the things that make the communities great with the problems that the communities can solve. So on Network Capital, what we do is that we use human capital, basically peer-to-peer knowledge sharing, and then use algorithms to personalize the kind of jobs that you can look at, the kind of opportunities that you should seek. What does that mean? Everyone doesn't need to become a data scientist. Everyone doesn't need to learn coding, because we need to be able to understand how technology will change the nature of our job. What would that mean on a personal level? What would that mean at a community level? And lastly, I want to talk about, very briefly I touched upon, let's not make it all about a job. A job doesn't make sense. Why? Because AI will produce a lot of consumer surplus. Every time we hail a cab, every time we order something, we are using some aspect of AI. But how do you create a job to a job that a person is uniquely suited to do? How do you have somebody who is a cab driver whose job doesn't exist today? How can that person become a photo tagger in an AI startup that is using, image sensing, for example? So how do you match? The one thing that I'd like to leave you all on the table is that everyone has something really unique to learn and something unique to share. AI can basically make that kind of cross-pollination, cross-learning at scale possible. So I think let's come together, and I think community as a service will be underpinning all of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Utkarsh. Now I will ask Gold Stan Radwan, Sally Radwan, who is a computer and biomedical engineer, and she had several activities in the area of tech and health, but she's also the advisor to our Minister of Communication and Information Technology on Egypt's AI strategy. Sally, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nagla. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll start by naming 3 challenges facing AI globally, not just in the region. And then I'll talk about Egypt's AI strategy for a little bit, and I've written everything down so I don't go over time, so pray for me. I'd love for the conversation to actually expand further on these 3 challenges that I'm going to name. But the first challenge for AI, in my opinion, is too much promise. Doing what I do, I meet people from all walks of life who want to talk about AI, and most of them seem to be divided into 2 camps. They either think that machines will become sentient tomorrow, they will be able to see and feel and be aware just like us, and eventually they're just going to kill us because we're useless. And the second group seems to be to think that AI is a panacea. No matter what you want to do, no matter what problem you have, there's an AI for that. And clearly both are hugely wrong. But the problem is that we simply do not have enough people with the right understanding of what this technology actually does and what it can and can't do. The second challenge is that we're trying to solve a 2030s problem with a 1930s mentality. Thinking of AI in terms of Keynesian economics just does not work. There needs to be more research and more thinking on new economic models, because having a pyramid-shaped economy, and Nagla mentioned the pyramid-shaped demographics, where the bottom rung has the largest number of people with the lowest skills and the lowest income, and as you climb up the rungs, numbers become lower, but then skills and income go higher, just doesn't apply in a world that is increasingly dominated by automation, because eventually you'll keep automating away the lower rungs, assuming that's true, which we all know is not really, because enough white-collar jobs are being automated away anyway. But even if it were, what do you do with the pyramid? You either keep shifting it up until there's no more room to go, or you have to change the shape of the pyramid. But then alternative models like universal basic income that have been proposed also have their drawbacks. So who ultimately pays for it? Who are the winners and losers? How do we actually make it work? So there's definitely a lot more thinking needed about the right economic model for the age of AI. And the third challenge is inclusivity or inclusiveness. And this comes in many flavors. So we've got AI superpowers dictating the global agenda, not just in technology and applications, but also in ethics and priorities. And within one nation, we've got an educational and digital divide between different classes of society, different genders, and so on, and many other forms of exclusion and discrimination. And as we all know, this is dangerous for data quality and bias, but it also has social stability and security implications in the long term. I don't have the full answers to any of these, but let me tell you what we're doing in Egypt to try and address at least some of them. Pretty early on, we decided that Egypt was not going to be a bystander in the fourth industrial revolution. We're not just going to let technology happen to us, we're going to become an active player and a leader, at least in our region, hopefully in some aspects globally as well. To achieve this, we decided on 3 pillars for Egypt's AI strategy, and those are human capacity building, using AI for development, in line with the SDGs, but also with our sustainable development goals, using AI to improve the efficiency and transparency of government operations. And then there's a 4th pillar as well, which has to do with our global and regional activities. And let me give you a quick overview of each pillar and how it addresses those challenges, or attempts to at least. So capacity building, of course, is the cornerstone of any nation's strategy for anything. And ours starts with general awareness to address the first challenge that I talked about, namely the lack of actual understanding of what this technology is about. We need to achieve a minimal amount of awareness among all factions of society so that at least we can separate fact from fiction, we can be aware of the risks, but also of the enormous opportunities that this technology affords. But the capacity building pillar also covers education in all its stages, from school to higher education, also technical and non-technical training. As Utkarsh said, not everyone needs to be a data scientist, and that's very true. Vocational training, reskilling and upskilling existing professionals. But we also need to acknowledge that inevitably some of these workers cannot be upskilled, or at least not fast enough. So it's important to also design that safety net that will catch them. And by that, by the way, I don't necessarily mean having a standard kind of social security program, but there are more innovative ways to make sure, or to make use of these people in this transition period and still have them be active members of society. And then for applications, we're shortly opening an AI application center which will house multiple projects in partnerships with leading institutions globally. And they will focus on a number of key sectors to start with, using AI in agriculture, water management, healthcare, infrastructure, economic development, and a field that Egypt should really be a global leader in, and that's natural language processing for Arabic. Finally, on the regional level, Egypt has submitted 2 proposals to the African Union and the Arab League to form 2 AI working groups with the aim of developing unified AI strategies for Africa and the Arab world. Both groups are led by Egypt, and we've already hosted the first meeting in Cairo. And the main objective of having those groups is to address the challenge of inclusivity. Because unfortunately, the global discussion is dominated by those who control the technology. But when you talk about upskilling workers in Finland, it's a very different conversation than talking about upskilling workers in Mali or in Egypt or in India. But the problem is you don't get that seat at the table unless you're one of the global leaders in technology. So the aim of unifying those voices and unifying those strategies is to come up with a common stance, in addition to also using the economies of scale that Utkarsh talked about in capacity development and in applications. You also need to unify your voice and your stance so that when you're sitting in an international forum, you can speak for all 55 African countries, not just for the one you represent. And we're also active in other international forums like UNESCO, the UN, OECD, WIPO, UNCTAD, G20, and others. Finally, back at home, we're passing an important piece of legislation on data protection and sharing, which will govern the relationship between data owners and data users. And we've recently formed the National AI Council, which will be the governing body for Egypt's AI strategy and will oversee its implementation. Thank you, and sorry for going a bit over time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sally. And thank you, Nadine. Nadine runs around with, the remaining time. Thank you so much. No, this is actually very interesting. I think we heard from Utkarsh and Sally on, what gives us hope in, realistic moving forward, steps to move forward. I think the part of the story as well are the, of the AI and fourth industrial revolution. Part of it is additional aspects that we can look at, and I invite Rohaya, our guest from the Senior Program Officer at Canada's International Development Research Center, IDRC. Rohaya, your time.
Hi,
go ahead.
Thank you. So there's a little bit of overlap actually with the identified challenges, but I'll do my best to frame it. I think as a program officer at IDRC, I always have to balance my enthusiasm with a healthy dose of skepticism and just in caution, and vice versa. because I do think that there's tremendous potential in our current technological environment, but we would be remiss if we didn't recognize that this fourth industrial evolution, as I actually like to call it, is emerging in the context of tremendous inequality between and within countries, among different socioeconomic classes, genders, and ethnicities. And it's also in a global context of dissipating international cooperation and a loss of democratic norms, which is really crucial. So the three key challenges that I see are kind of three groups. It's technology and infrastructure, including data, human capacities and expertise, and integrated policy and research. So just technology-wise, in terms of infrastructure, connectivity is crucial, but as has already been pointed out, you know, despite the mobile revolution and broadband, about 4 billion people in the world don't actually have internet access. And in Egypt, although there's not great figures, it looks to be about 40%, although you said 30%. So, or 30% have connectivity. So, you know, AI does need a strong infrastructure, and it needs, for this massive computational power that's required, an internet connectivity. So it's hard to imagine what happens with AI in this uneven distribution of the infrastructure. And that speaks to data inequality as well. Sorry. Data inequality and the cost implications of that data inequality. So we know data sets that are, you know, there's entrenched inequalities with representation, they're incomplete, they reflect a lot of bias, as has been pointed out. And if machine learning is trained on that, then it reproduces those biases. But Martin Hilbert also points out the cost implications of producing locally relevant data for better machine learning. So when there's pressure for cost efficiency, there's pressure on that, how to capture that local diversity. And there's an unspoken trade-off between the generalizable results that you can get and the locally relevant data. And because of the economies of scale, that creates a strong pressure to adopt local conditions to the imported AI for the sake of efficiency rather than tailoring to the local environment. And that's really important because different countries face different health epidemics, they face different variations of those same epidemics, genetic mutations adjust to the genetics of the host. So, for instance, if AI is trained on cancer cells, as he points out, Hilbert points out, in hospitals in New York and Berlin, it could lead to dangerously confusing diagnoses, which at the best is just wrong, and in the worst is really quite harmful. So these are some of the challenges on a technical level. But this also speaks to human capacities and expertise. So the human resource challenges of developing, designing, using, and regulating AI is another important thing that we have to grapple with. There's a huge global divide with basic digital literacy. There's even basic literacy challenges in the world, let alone digital literacy. I mean, if 100 million people, young people between 18 and 25, don't have basic literacy, then what are we talking about when we talk about the digital ecosystem? So there's also a scarce talent and a diverse talent challenge as well. We need more than technologists and engineers in California and India designing our AI ecosystems. So, and this speaks to the challenges also of institutional capacities within governments to effectively regulate new technologies, but also to safeguard human rights that are going to come under threat with the supercharged potential surveillance of some of these tools or highly targeted propaganda campaigns. We need agile policy ecosystems that can figure out how to regulate. And yet, have any of us really figured out how to regulate global tech companies? They represent more power than most states right now. And they're almost completely unregulated in most places. I mean, we have data protection laws that are coming in, but these are cross-border challenges that we can't just address within countries. We have to begin to look outside of that. And as has been pointed out by the economic challenges as well, I mean, I don't need to say that 2/3 of the jobs in developing countries are predicted to be automated. This was from the World Bank in 2016. Now, I think that holds up an interesting mirror to the 4IR hypothesis, because we talk a lot about how, this exciting new revolution, and yet if jobs are being automated in the developing world, how are we going to deal with this? Or the 90% of the 16 trillion in GDP that's going to actually accrue mostly to North America and to China. In my opinion, not everyone can be an entrepreneur. And we need jobs for this burgeoning population of young people, about 70% in the Middle East, right? So, and policymakers need to be able to respond. And my worry is that the countries most at risk are the least equipped to implement these social protections. so 1 minute. So then we also need integrated policy and research. As Klaus Schwab had said, integrated and comprehensive responses. Yet, in my opinion, the problem is that collectively we're not really good at collaborative and cooperative politicking in the world. So what we need are research and evidence that can draw together disciplines and silos, from intellectual property and law to data protection and cybersecurity, ICT, telecoms, economic and competition regulation. But then we also have to understand the human impact, yes. But right now, there's very little research and development money devoted to interdisciplinary researches of study, but across the MENA and sub-Saharan Africa. But research monies that do come actually tend to be targeted towards STEM. And again, we don't just need technologists and entrepreneurs developing our AI ecosystems. We do need transdisciplinary research to grapple with these challenges. So I think with this kind of potential digital inequality today, we don't want to exacerbate these challenges tomorrow, so we need to kind of figure out what to do. So I'll just briefly say, at the IDRC, I mean, I don't want to paint a bleak picture. I mean, the point is I wouldn't do what I do if I didn't think there was a good future ahead of us, and I believe in the human potential. So, IDRC is really good at supporting locally driven, locally relevant research to build up a strong evidence base that we try to, to ensure that policymakers have that evidence. And we support local institutional capacity over long periods, like the center here, so that institutions become go-to trusted centers for evidence. So our lines of work, just really briefly, we did support a white paper on AI for development, which you can find online. We've supported some big data analytics works that's using mobile network big data for policy. We have a strong portfolio on education to improve education in the global south so that the next generation can problem solve and thrive. And we are leveraging some AI tools in order to bring education to scale. And we started a network of excellence in sub-Saharan Africa so that to bring together machine learning specialists and researchers with social scientists. And then we're also working with other like-minded funders to support an AI for Development initiative. Yes, I know 0 minutes, so I'm finished. But just to say, we see this as a long-term commitment. We're a development actor. We've been around for about 50 years, so we're committed to ensuring that there's a good future for all of us. So
thank you so much, Rohaya. Sorry to be so draconian all the time. No, really appreciate it. And I must say we are very grateful to the support of IDRC here at the Access to Knowledge for Development Center. So we will hear from Leslie Chan, our guest from Toronto, University of Toronto, Scarborough, Associate Director of the Center for Critical Development Studies and Professor of Arts, Culture, and Media. Leslie, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Nagla. First of all, congratulations to you and your center for the 10th anniversary. I've been a big admirer of your center from afar for many years because we also have a lot of common interests. And so this is a great honor and pleasure to be here to share some thoughts. I'm going to preface by saying that I'm really speaking on behalf of myself and my observation as an educator over the years. My primary really passion is education, and I do research in support of education. And so I want to make a few remarks about AI and inclusions and inequality from that perspective. So one of the things that Utash mentions about today is that we don't ask questions about how and why as much, because we tend to think that we have the question at our fingertips. And when I ask my students how did they find an answer to certain questions, the first thing they do, of course, is Google. And of course, and the answers they get are not really the kind of answer that we hope our students with critical thinking skills would like to be relying upon. And yet, increasingly, our decision-making power, if you could call that, has been taken away from us without even us questioning it consciously on a day-to-day basis. Most decision-making now are done by machines. The driver that took us here on the Uber yesterday was done by machines. Most of the things that we do we think are doing consciously are now being decided by machine. And in education, unfortunately, a lot of decisions are also being done by decisions that are taken out of our hands, from very basic things of day-to-day classroom activities to higher policy decision making. And I will give you some examples to illustrate and why we need to be rethinking about taking back our ability to make decisions away from the machine to a certain extent. I mean, there's still going to be a lot of need for using big data and analytics and so forth to help us make a decision, but I think by and large we need to know who is in control of those design decisions in the first place. So one of the things I've been very interested in is access to knowledge, and the particular area I look at is knowledge production through journals production. So all universities get their really international presence through their faculty's publications in international journals. And of course, a lot of our efforts are focusing on publishing in these internationally indexed journals. And yet, if you look at these databases, big databases that index journals from around the world, they are highly biased, of course, in favor of English language journals and from particular parts of the world, big universities that are sort of the usual suspect. And if you look at these big databases, international databases, very little in terms of other languages, Spanish, French, and of course Arabic. And so you have lots of knowledge from around the world that are essentially made invisible by these databases. These databases are then the basis of data for other analytics in terms of a lot of policy decisions about research, funding, and resource allocation. And so those institutions that have already well resourced, of course, to let's say, make themselves more visible in these indexes will do even better. And those institutions that have traditionally, historically been marginalized, of course, they are further made invisible. And so the more we rely on these indexes and decision-making based on these indexes, the more we will continue to make invisible other kind of knowledge productions from other parts of the world other than the centers. And so these kind of asymmetry, if we're not careful, will continue to be exacerbated. And above all, because we know that a lot of today's big tech, AIs, are dominated by a small handful of the same usual suspect. And there are innovations all around, but no matter who I speak to, their exit strategy is usually to how are we going to end up selling to one of the big five and so forth. So a lot of local innovations for local decision making that support local entrepreneurships end up being sucked up by the big tech that do not particularly care about the local. And the same could be said about institution of education. And so increasingly, we have the same dominant player in the education sector that are dominating their decision making, producing rankings about universities and programs and so forth. And students around the world are making their decisions about where to go to school and what program to take based on these decisions that are, again, made by a small handful of tech companies that are increasingly in control of these data that are then generated into decision-making analytics that other people then subscribe to and make decisions based upon. So it's not just the students that go to Google and ask questions. I think we become too reliant on these different supplier of informations and analytics that I think we need to be more thoughtful about how we could question this. And so the question is then, the next step for me is make sure that data are representative of the kind of broad communities that we're supposed to be reaching out to. So we're not interested in just a certain type of databases. We want to expand other kinds of knowledge productions that are being made visible. So how do we design technologies and analytics and AI that help us find those things that have not been found before? And so to make that as part of the conversation and the global knowledge base. And I think increasingly these kind of problems that we face around the world, quite global in nature, actually need a lot of local insight. And we're not getting a lot of these local insights. So I would say this is where our efforts should be concentrating going forward. And with that 28 seconds left, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Thank you very much. Different perspectives on the topic. Now the floor is open for discussion. I know that Wael has asked to provide his contribution. We will have 3 minutes on every participation. And in the previous session, I was in a hurry to speak in my 2 or 3 minutes, and then I realized the round keeps going back and forth. So, please feel free to come back with comments. Just please raise your name tag so I know that you're next in line for the speech. Thank you. Tfaddal.
Thank you, Dr. Nagla, and thank you, everybody, for the very useful discussion. So I come from IBM, so it's normal that I'm going to talk about Python coding now, so I will take you through the technology of artificial intelligence. No, I'm not going to do this. So I'm going actually to raise very simple points from a different angle. So being in the technology field, we are continuously developing technologies. So we are in the business of developing technologies that are changing the world. So that's the whole field that we are working on with all the different companies that you have seen over the last decades. My company, IBM, has been in the business for 109 years. So we have been continuously coming up with new innovations, new technologies. I think we are very lucky these days that we are living a new era, a new phase of technology. I'm not a big fan of this fourth industrial revolution, the fifth, what is going to happen and so on. So I look at it much simpler than this. So I think the whole world went through the time when technology was a supporting or a helping tool. That was the time when electricity, machinery just helped the human race to do things better, right? Manufacturing came to the picture. Then we lived the era when technology was a catalyst for change, was a catalyst to introduce new things. Think about the internet. This happened around the mid-1990s when the internet enabled access to knowledge, but more importantly, enabled connection between individuals, nations, and so on. So this had a lot of benefit, but in the meantime, this created also a lot of challenges because globalization came removing a lot of the barriers to entry, so nobody was protected. And then we are right now seeing this time when technology is becoming to be really the business. Technology is creating new business models. Think about Uber, think about Amazon, think about all these digital economies that we're talking about. All right, we'll not go into this part for longer than this, but this is driving for a more focus on knowledge. Although in the 1990s we started terms like knowledge capital, knowledge management, by now knowledge is becoming to be the real asset for competitive advantage. The knowledge economy, yes, you're absolutely right. So the need for knowledge is becoming to be the key competitive advantage that will help individuals, but more also even nations to continue and to be successful. Now, this will drive more demand on skills. So we have been talking about skills for a very long time. Now we need different type of skills. And skills in areas, and I like what my colleagues here were saying, not necessarily everybody is going to be a coder, not everybody is going to be a data scientist. We need to find the right fields, the right areas where we need to develop skills in the future. And this is what we need from also all education institutions. Not necessarily only on the graduate level, but we need to start from the very early beginning. There is a big gap today between what the education systems are producing, are generating to the world, and what the job market and the future is needed. Closing this gap is going to be the biggest challenge we are all faced with. So let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Wael. If I may just very quickly comment, this is very important also because part of the discussions that we're doing, part of the School of Business anniversary is also to think of the way forward as a school. So it is important for us what you're saying about education, learning, teaching, publishing, research. This is important for the school as a whole, including the center as well. So guiding this discussion, we'll have a white paper written about this discussion. So thank you. I just wanted to note that. So I have on my, Galel to go first. Yes, go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much. thank you for the early statements. My name is Galal Hassan. I'm Professor of Information Systems Engineering at Cairo University, in particular the School of Computers and Artificial Intelligence, which is a recent name that we've acquired. I very much appreciate the statement by Rohaya, actually, and her emphasis on policy and policy making. I think my view is that I can perhaps summarize in one statement, which is technology is nothing without governance. There's lots of technologies about, lots of hype, lots of skills in that area as well, but I think we're lacking the framework of actually putting these things together to be effective. I'm very interested in technology serving socioeconomic development. I spent like 17 years of my life teaching and studying in the UK, and I came to Egypt to teach at Cairo University with very high hopes that I can actually inject a lot of what I've learned in the UK into the Egyptian higher education sector, especially the state one. I feel very passionate about that. I've also happened to visit lots of out of the main cities universities like MENA and Upper Egypt, etc., and I was really pleased and surprised by the agility and the intelligence and the enthusiasm and the sheer energy that the Egyptian youth have in state universities, not private universities. So they're very ordinary families. They are sort of some of the 2% who are catered for. Another 2% higher than that, actually, in state universities. And I keep coming to this point that we need better governance for technologies and how they are deployed in societies, because to exploit and leverage society at the level of 100 million inhabitants of Egypt, you need much more than these little spots or bright spots dotted around. Let me give you a very simple example. In my university, in my office, I cannot access the internet wirelessly. My colleagues in the telecommunications department, in the faculty of engineering, in a very sort of highly ranked Egyptian state university, do not have access to the internet in their offices. So, I mean, what AI are we talking about? And we still have to discuss things like freedom of access to information, the freedom to actually carry out surveys and polls and stuff like that. I think before we focus a little too much on technology, we need to focus behind that at the level of the policies and governance methods that actually give rise to the infrastructure, the requisite infrastructure that we have. I always give the example of, for example, mobile communication technologies and how the national, the NTRA, the National Telecommunication Regulation Society, I think it's failing dismally in its functions. I'm sorry, I don't want to offend anybody here, but I can compare it with Oftel, for example, the Office of Telecommunications in England, whereby they forced telecommunications companies to stop price fixing, and given another name, and actually to the extent that roaming charges across Europe is now completely free for people to have. There are lots and lots of issues here, and we all know the problems that we have about our connectivity from homes, etc. So I think there's a much wider policy framework spanning providers, higher education institutions with all the sheer power and potential, as well as the providers of technology and capacity building and training. So that's, I think I've run out of time now, so I'll have to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Galal. And on my list, I have Ahmed. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Nagla. Just let me introduce myself because I'm a person who did a PhD back in 1986 in artificial intelligence. Back then, it was artificial. It's more real now. So I've always taken an interest in this field, and I work in the field of production, manufacturing in particular. So since Klaus Schwab has come out with his book on Fourth Industrial Revolution, he's come out with, or the World Economic Forum has come out with a report called the Readiness for the Future of Production Assessment. And I'd like to share with you some of the findings of this report. This report, actually in the same style of the competitiveness report, scans countries across the world. In this case, they take 100 countries. They've taken 100 countries in this report. And they divide a matrix into 4 quadrants where they look at drivers of production on one axis, and on the other one is the structure of production. Egypt is ranked 66. And let me point out to 5 particular points on this report, which Egypt, I think, may need to look at. And especially if there is a council that is looking at artificial intelligence, I think some of these points are of great importance, and I think Sally addressed some of these things in her discussion. The first one is we rank number 95 out of 100 in terms of companies embracing disruptive ideas. We rank 95 in female participation in the workforce, in the labor force. We're the 100th, number 100, on quality of vocational training. That's a big, big, big problem that we face in factories in Egypt, and I really see that it's going to be an uphill battle if we talk about a fourth industrial revolution, and the basis of the educational system are at stake here. And the number 5 is trade tariffs, and we seem to be schizophrenic when it comes to the trade tariffs, because on one hand we have lots of free trade agreements with just about, I would say, maybe more than 50% of the world. And on the other hand, the rest of the world with which we don't have free trade agreements, we have extremely high customs tariffs. So I would say of all the points that I've mentioned, human capital are very, very important, or is a very important aspect to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. I have a comment about this, but I will keep it until until I finish my list. Yes, we'll have another round. Yes. So I have Marwan Tarazi from Birzeit University, Palestine.
Thank you, Nagla. Mabruk again.
Shukran.
Human capital. I just want to continue on human capital, but the point that I don't think too many people keep emphasizing enough on human capital is the element of basic education. Because everything is beginning with basic education. And if you look at all the developing countries that are facing issues that have to deal with, like knowledge production, data production, awareness of ethics, these are values and competencies that need to be instilled in children from the very beginning. And our educational systems are very traditional so far. And when you look at what's being done now, there's throughout, we're doing some project with UNICEF, and we had a meeting a few weeks ago with the ministers of education throughout the Arab world, and everybody is still working along the same traditional way. We want to change a little bit, we want to do a bit of improvement on the curriculum, and there's a need for a paradigm shift if we are to see something happening differently. If you look at exams like TIMSS, or if you look at exams like the PISA, and you see where the Arab countries or developing countries are, and you can tell, you can find clear correlation for where things are. So if you really want people to start producing more knowledge and local knowledge, and to appreciate it and to use it and to become aware of it, I think we really need to start with the basic education. And I think that this kind of dialogue, any policy change has to go immediately to the ministries of basic education, ministries of education. Because if we look at the higher education, we're already at the elite of the elite in the Arab world, again, or in the developing world. So we need to look at the common, the citizens, the common citizens, those who go and work in the mums and shop stores, or those who want to go and do vocational education. And even if we talk about vocational education, you no longer need, because at least a lot of people are saying that AI is going to take over a lot of the non-skilled labor. They're going to start doing the work of so even vocational workers need to be sort of data or knowledge or technology savvy, so they can start working with the new technologies and vocations that are coming up. So just, this is my thought, that, extremely important to look at ministries of education, basic education, and not just limit our discussion and narrative to the sort of higher end of the life cycle of data and fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you, Marwan. If I may just link with the previous session, because education keeps coming up, and this is precisely what we discussed in the previous session, not just university, also school, young children, education of young children, and not just in Cairo, but beyond, speaking to Galal's point, going beyond Cairo to other parts of Egypt where there's tremendous amount of talent that needs to be, tapped beyond the main cities. Just building on what we said in the previous, what was discussed in the previous session. So, Maha, speaking about education, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. Congratulations on your 10th anniversary, both of you. So I work at the Center for Learning and Teaching at AUC, so I support other professors in their teaching. But my undergraduate education was in computer science, and I did the thesis on neural networks, so I sort of understand, machine learning a little bit. And I do research on educational technology, and one of the things that I'm most concerned about is the tables and who gets to speak on the table, as you were talking about. And what I'm always wondering is, as we think about developing artificial intelligence that will hopefully empower someone, I don't know how much, for example, the educational technology that uses AI includes teachers and is solving the problems of teachers and students, because a lot of the times someone imagines, oh, let's do automated essay grading. And they don't think about, first of all, is that really the problem that teachers need? Is that actually going to empower students? Even if it does solve a problem, is that the most important problem to invest in? And I don't know if Egypt has a policy for this. I don't know if IDRC is working on this. Like, who's working on, who gets to set the agenda for where investment and funding go? Who gets included in it? How do you empower teachers to understand the potential of AI so that they can then decide for themselves, working with someone who can actually implement it, what to use, and how to make sure that the data is inclusive so that it doesn't reproduce power hierarchies in the world with data. And one of the things, Galal, you talked about governance, and several people talked about governance, and I was doing research about AI and teachers' views on it, and I realized that people in Egypt are less likely to bring up governance, probably because we don't know if it gets implemented as well, versus other countries where governance really does, like, GDPR and how that got implemented right away. And then the other thing is, what Utkarsh was talking about are the things that only humans can do. I keep hearing things like apps for empathy and for refugees' well-being, and I'm thinking, why are there not investments in just empowering human beings to help human beings? Why are they jumping to AI? Why is the solution for everything an app? And again, I don't know if the folks working on this here in the room have ideas for how to sort of not go down that road and focus on what will make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha. Mustafa, go ahead.
Thank you very much for organizing this roundtable. I'm Mustafa Kamil Said. I teach political science at Cairo University and at the American University in Cairo. And I have been running research centers working on issues of development for the last 2 decades. I think one of the major challenges created by the fourth industrial revolution and the use of artificial intelligence is the growing technological dependency of countries of the South. It is easier to absorb, to deal with the fourth industrial revolution and the use of artificial intelligence in countries which have gone through the first industrial revolution, the second industrial revolution, the third industrial revolution, and they are moving to the fourth industrial revolution. But most countries of the world have not even succeeded to come to the second industrial revolution. And I think this is the case of Egypt. So I think the impact of the fourth industrial revolution and the use of artificial intelligence would be far greater in these countries, would be far disruptive in these countries. And therefore the gap between them and, the highly advanced countries would increase. One way to deal with this gap is to increase expenditure on science and technology, on scientific research. But this is a big problem. But the problem is not only financial. The problem, of course, Dr. Galal Dean referred to the problem in universities. At the Faculty of Engineering, he cannot have access to the internet. I'm lucky. I'm at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science. I have access to the internet. But the problem is not there. The problem is, in order to advance, scientific research, you must have also scientific mentality. not only in society at all, but among the rulers themselves within the government. So to what extent our governments adopt a scientific approach in dealing with their problems. Of course, this is not limited to countries of the South. President Trump does not believe in climate change, but the case is less serious in the United States because scientific research centers, universities enjoy some sort of autonomy. But in our countries, universities, research centers do not enjoy any kind of autonomy. And therefore, in fact, we have many examples of policies which are not at all inspired by science and technology. So I think, we need also software, in order to promote scientific research and in order to, be capable of dealing with the consequences of the fourth industrial revolution. My, positive comment is that, in fact, it is still possible to reduce the negative impact of the fourth industrial revolution by trying, as much as possible to direct this revolution to what serves the needs of developing countries. Arab countries are major food importers. So I think, the fourth industrial revolution and the use of artificial intelligence could be very useful in increasing, availability of food, etc. in these countries. And I think we have a problem of shortage of water in all Arab countries. And I think also, part of the positive implications of the fourth industrial revolution is to be able to, develop, crops that need less water. So I think there is still a way open, but I think this depends very much on our rulers, believe really in the importance of science, not only in terms of their public declarations, but in terms of the way they make policies.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. That's actually part of the sort of the rest of the argument in saying there are threats that you can try to mitigate the threats by using turning things around and using the technology to alleviate, the negative effects. Thank you very much. So Nada, Ihab, please go ahead.
Hi, so can everyone hear me? I'm not very used to public speaking, so I'm very sorry if my throat clogs up. Just a bit of a background. I actually work at Microsoft. I work in the government affairs team. So I'm highly focused around policy work on my day-to-day life, and it's a topic that is very close to my heart. I wrote my dissertation around the fourth industrial revolution and how it can address SDGs in the MEA region. So I'm very passionate about this. And as you all know, the ecological crisis in which we're in today is definitely due to the lack of knowledge that we had back in the day about what man can cause, that man can cause so much harm to the world's ecosystem, and the lack of policy infrastructure. So I really need to jump on Ustaz Gala's point earlier that policy is crucial, and it's important to define key principles and key guidelines, such as transparency. So for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on transparency and accountability. So as you all know, AI is used to make consequential decisions about people, whether a person is creditworthy, for example, or whether or not they're qualified enough for a job. So these systems are increasingly taking decisions on our behalf with us having little knowledge on the algorithms and the data sets that are being used for them. So with that in mind, within that context, regulators have recently sought to mandate transparency. As you all know, the GDPR does state the right to explanation, which brings to my point of having explainable AI as a backbone to policies, not just for the Middle East, but worldwide. So, AI is a black box, and it's a buzzword. We don't really know most of the time what it is, what it's used for, the profiles that are being made about ourselves. And AI, even though it's been in the making for many years, it has reached its peak at the moment, but AI is not perfect. So regarding transparency, a lot of people are requesting, open data platforms to be available, for data sets to be available for the public to see, but that's usually not the most ideal way of doing it. Algorithm transparency does create false hope. And not only is it technically unattainable, it obfuscates the politics at stake. So putting complex code, as I said, in the public domain is little to achieve accountability. But we need to ensure that developers put in place the right explanations to how they are coming to their AI is coming to the conclusions to which they're reaching, so that individuals have the right to hold them accountable during the process. Yeah, so that's my point for now.
Thank you very much, Nada. Sameh, please go ahead.
Yes, hi. I'm also like Nada, new to this, so thanks for the invitation. I think I just want to like point of view from a startup kind of perspective angle. So I'm Sameh, and I founded a startup. I was living abroad, and then I came back to Egypt, and I founded a startup in the tech industry related to marriage and online dating. And then I sold the company to Match Group, which is the leading in the US. And now I'm working with them on making Harmonica a global company. And I think what I want to shed the light on is the phenomena where most of the big startups, which we have the bright side for sure, like we have a lot of ideas in Egypt and a lot of startups and things that really look promising. But once those startups go to the scale-up phase, they always tend to go outside. Either governmental, of course, if you want to raise money, you have to register your company outside Egypt. So no investor would allow you to give you money if you don't register your company outside. And that's an early alarm. And then when you start your scale up, all the big investors, like, and all the money coming in, they actually ask this question: do you really want to keep the company in Cairo, or do you want to move it somewhere? And that's the reality you have to face. Because yes, the early signs are good, but then when you go to the scale-up phase, we're looking at Swivel, they moved outside, they went to Dubai, Visita, they went to Dubai, and we also internally, like, once you have big fund, that's the questions, like, can you sustain your talent pool along the growth phase of the company, when you become like IBM, Microsoft, or like even like smaller phase when you become 500 employee or 1,000 employee, and also would the governance allow you to scale and become a global player with fast pace? Those are the questions. And of course, I don't have a solution. I'm surrounded by a lot of expertise, but I just wanted to shed the light on that. And we internally face these questions at the moment. Okay, like certain things that should take a week or a month in other countries, it takes months and like 9 months or more. And it just, and the international side, they don't understand why it takes that long. That's of course in terms of governance, and in terms of talent pool, we still lack a lot of things, like to be able to hire and get the right mentality and the right mindset, and not just the technical aspect, but also the mindset. It is a big challenge, and I really hope that I'm hearing a lot of feedback, and I hope that it looks like we all agree, but I think that this voice has to reach to the policymakers to know that they have to do aggressive changes and drastic changes to be able to catch up, or else we'll just waste like a few years. And yes,
thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Miguel?
My name is Miguel Centeno. I'm a professor at Princeton. I'm the vice dean of the Woodrow Wilson School there. First of all, thank you for the invitation and congratulations on the centenary. I'm going to follow a little bit on the issues of threats of AI, or the fourth industrial revolution, or whatever you want to call it. I'm always struck by conversations at universities about dealing with AI, and the general tone is, how can we prepare humans for a digital world? And I always wonder if we should be working on preparing machines for a human world. That we've sort of accepted. I mean, the best example is this thing, which we've all, it's like a fifth appendage on our lives, an extra sensory, and yet there was no vote about this. There was no discussion about this. We are probably ruining generations with these things, and yet here we are, where I've noticed with my students, they all walk with this almost on the side. It's almost become like the old idea, you shake your hand so you can't reach your sword. Well, now you can't shake this hand because you need your phone to make sure that the person is popular and how many stars he or she has. I really think we have to be very, very careful about how we go into this fourth industrial revolution, and perhaps we don't have any choice. where we can at least pretend we have some agency. And I see three problems. One that I haven't heard too much about, especially in reference to the developing world, which is automation. Just to give you two numbers. In the United States, there's 3.5 million truck drivers. It's expected that in 10 or 15 years, those people will disappear. Those employment will disappear. The United States agricultural sector now consumes about 1% of the workforce. I don't know what the exact numbers are for Egypt. I would guess around 30%. What is Egypt going to do with the other 29% of their fedayeen when they're replaced by irrigation machines and harvesting machines? This automation leads to a second problem, which is the inequality. There's a dark side. Maybe I read too much sci-fi. But there's a dark side to this where we can have 1% of the world dealing with the machines, designing with machines, talking with machines, and the other 9% of the world cleaning their floors and changing their diapers. That is not a world I particularly want to be a part of, yet it's one that we're getting to without a thought. And before we'll know it, Steve Jobs will own everything. Or no, he's dead. Jeff Bezos will own everything. Maybe, who knows? He might have been. He might be immortal. The inequality implications of this digital healthcare, et cetera. And the last issue is one that was raised before, which is about governance. AI is not just a black box. It's black boxes all the way down. It's a black box speaking to a black box speaking to a black box. And very few human beings know what's going on in those black boxes. One of the biggest lessons of the and just give me 20 seconds. One of the biggest lessons of the 2008-2009 global financial crisis is that none of these millionaire investment bankers knew what the hell they were selling. Nobody understood what was in those 5,000-page contracts. Well, similarly today, we don't know what the algorithms say. We don't know what the algorithm's saying to the other algorithm. And again, maybe it's unavoidable, but at least can we go into this fourth industrial revolution, or whatever it might be, with a little bit more self-awareness, and for universities not to participate in this process of turning human beings into digital appendages, but actually maybe defending the notion that humanity owes more than machines. Sorry to be a preacher, but I live in a world where these things are taking over, and I'm pretty scared about it.
Thank you very much. Ayman?
Thank you. I actually want to pick up on that point and on many dimensions. First things, a couple of stories. If you go to Michigan and you look at many of the automotive factories that used to employ thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, many of them right now turn into what they call lights out factories, which basically means a factory that doesn't have light because it doesn't have human, because it's basically run by robotic arms. If you go to Egypt, many of the call centers that were actually a promise for jobs for youth who are fairly educated are actually now reducing the number of seats, simply because a lot of those calls that you make are actually automated, responded to in an automated fashion. So the whole idea that we're talking about AI, we're talking about the future, it's actually here, it's happening, and the jobs are lost. So the only reason we're not seeing it in a huge magnitude is the floodgates have not opened yet. But they're just about to open. Is it next year? Is it the year after? It's not 2030. It's actually much faster than that, and we're going to see a huge impact on jobs. So that's point number one. Point number two, the reason people are scared, we're all scared, is because I don't know what it is, so I can't control it. And if I can't control it, I cannot regulate it, I cannot manage it. So something is going to happen, and I don't know what that something is. And as Sally was saying, we're applying a lot of models from a century ago to try and solve the problem. So that's basically the challenge. You move to the whole point of the data. Everybody's talking about data, but most of the regulation about data are from a sense of privacy. But privacy is kind of an old, obsolete thing. Now the importance of data is about monetization. So Facebook makes money out of my data. They sell my profile and my data to someone. They make money out of my property. So like the old discourse about who makes effort, who makes money out of the effort, the capital or the labor, now it's who makes money out of the data, it's the platform or the individual. So there is something about my ability to monetize or share the monetary benefit of my data. And that's something that's not coming up, and it will have to come up at some point in time. That's the way where people actually want to claim some part, a share of the monetary value that is generated by data. And I think that's a policy issue that we're not talking about. last point, it's about actually universities. And I would have loved to separate them, but just going to universities and looking at them and looking at actually many other institutions. A lot of the middle layer universities and colleges and programs will be basically displaced by MOOCs and online learning and so on. So we'll have the top elite that educate the elite, and maybe things that are physical on the ground, community colleges that touch people's lives in day to day. But a lot of the middle layer jobs, universities, institutions are going to disappear. So back to your point, is it going to be that huge, not just inequality, but huge diversions in wealth, in institutions, and in things that go around? And I don't know the answer about that, but I think the answers will happen in the regulatory domain, but that domain is responsive after the fact, after the social impact has happened. So the question, which for Sally and people like her who are at the cutting edge, how can you actually find solutions that are a little bit preemptive to a certain extent at the regulatory space that maybe would save some of the kind of disruption that happens in transition?
Thank you, Ayman. We will have closing remarks in the end from the people who provided opening remarks. But let me make a very quick comment about the call centers, because that's another example of, that was a job, these were jobs for students who were educated, who had languages. So that's an additional factor contributing to unemployment of the educated, because they are losing their jobs to, automated or robotics, automated answering services. Amr, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nagli. Well, I still believe, of course, we know that everything has the merit and the demerit, but still I find that this is a great opportunity for Egypt, where we reposition ourselves from a typical importer and consumer of technology into someone who's producing technology for the first time. I'm very happy that already the perspective of businesses and the perspective of startup has been raised before. However, I would like to add another dimension. I think it's an opportunity threatened by several factors. On top of this, those factors would be the myopia in relation to artificial intelligence, wasting time, setting strategies that maybe are not very effective. I think if we were to set a strategy for AI, where we have been hearing for long from many entities and many areas in the government, not only one sole entity, is very important to have it bottom up, because this is the voice that should be heard, that we heard just a few minutes ago in relation to the startups, the businesses, and so on. And by the way, it goes down to the education, as I will explain now in a second. When it comes to businesses, maybe I have this experience where we had also a startup in the field of artificial intelligence. The moment we received our first investor, yes, we were also forced to register the company in the Netherlands in order to complete this transaction, which what we have done already. At that time, we had two rivals, global rivals. One is an Israeli company called Betacam, Briefcam, and the other one is a Chinese company. At that time, the Israeli company and the Chinese company got awarded with big infrastructure projects locally. So accordingly, Briefcam was acquired by Canon in order to be responsible for all the video analytics for Tokyo 2020. And the Chinese company ended up by a value of $5.5 billion as we speak now. While in Egypt, still there is the mentality of nobody got fired for awarding IBM, no offense for IBM. So nobody wants to take the risk by starting a startup for a new business or something like that. How this is affecting education, because if we're talking about education as another threat or another challenge for AI, we have to recall, of course, Finland and Switzerland, where for any youth who turns 16, they spend only 30% of their time in the classroom, while the rest internship and working in corporates. So in my company, for example, where I have almost 40 developers, I lost almost 12 throughout the past 2 years to all global companies with global contracts to work in the States, like Google and others and so on. So the fact is that we are not just a corporate or a startup, but we are actually a school where we are cascading knowledge about artificial intelligence to the youth. So if those similar companies are not to grow and nurture and get the support and get the first priority when it comes to any kind of blueprint for a strategy, then you are not only affecting an opportunity to become a producer of technology for the first time in history, but also you are threatening your ability to develop youth speaking this language. Thank you.
Very much. Okay, Behr?
Thank you, Nagla, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. My name is Behr Asmat. I work for ICANN. ICANN is this global body that manages part of the internet infrastructure. We have nothing to do with AI, but like those who studied AI maybe 20 plus years ago, we seem to be less excited about the technology itself. We believe it's a piece of software that does fabulous things, but perhaps we're more focused, like others around the table, we're more focused on the how and what the any technology can do for us. So my intervention is not particularly about AI, but it's more about the impact of technology on us, on the people, on the society. And in any technology ecosystem, there are mainly three components. One that is about governance, policies, funding mechanisms, and so forth. Another one about the technology itself and the, all the technical evolutions that take place. And the third one is about the people. And I think this is the part, and of course, development goes in all the three parts, and we cannot really control it. We cannot say we're going to focus on the governance part and leave the technology and all this. It all goes as it goes. But I think what we, in this part of the world, in the MENA region, and I think this is what we're here to discuss, in this region, I think we need to be more focused on our communities, on our people. We have a lot of challenges, and I think whether it's a policy, whether it's a sort of regulation, it has to take the human aspect into consideration, all the way from the coders and the data scientists, which I agree. I mean, we don't have to all have to be data scientists, but we need this segment, and we also need the policymakers, regulators, and we also need to look at the laymen, the normal people who may not be like tech savvy, what their problems are and how we can solve those problems. So I think in this region, our focus should be on the people and how the technology can help solve the problems, and to look at the segments from healthcare, education, etc., and see what we can do. One of the things I want to mention very quickly, 20 years ago when we used to talk about digital divide, back then the solution was more or less feasible. We were talking about making access available to people, and they will get there, and we can sort of bridge the divide. I think the divide today is much more difficult to be bridged due to all the evolution that's taking place in technologies like AI and others. And I think this puts more pressure on the stakeholders. Amr mentioned the bottom-up, and Urkash mentioned the community-based initiatives, and I think both are very important. And in this part of the world, again, Egypt included, we lack this approach. We lack the approach of getting stakeholders together around the table, like in this set. I mean, this is a very unique setup for Egypt, for this part of the world, and I commend the AUC for having us today. So community-based initiatives that are human and people-centric, I think, is key. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Behr. I should thank my dean. It was his idea to bring people from, different specializations. So I have to also give him credit additionally. Thank you very much, Behr. Ihab, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I just want to make a quick comment about stats that I hear a few times about inclusion, because I think this is the main topic of this. And just from our experience, because I work a lot on statistics and fairness and bias in ML and machine learning, and we need to be careful that we don't read too much. I think Egypt has a risk of being a top-down place as opposed to a bottom-up place. So statistics can be extremely dangerous. And like, for example, the fact that there is no demographic parity doesn't mean, like bias doesn't mean unfairness. And we have to be careful with this, because even the machine learning community is struggling with what fairness is. It's like still like an ongoing debate. So I don't want people to say, oh, okay, look, like, how many people from MENA versus Cairo, and there's less from that, hence it's unfair. It's not. There is just less educated people from one place to the other. There are psychological problems and economic problems over the last 50 years that cause these things to happen. So demographic parity is actually known to be a very bad fairness metric. So just we have to be careful. And just to be controversial, I think we all need to be data scientists. So I heard a lot about this. There is nothing wrong with that. I think if you're not a data scientist, you're probably going to be fooled by somebody who's going to throw statistics at you.
Thank you very much. Dean Kamel, تفضل شريف.
All right, so I have a few thoughts here I want to share. So surely the underlying sort of theme here is human capital investment. That we have to put that up front. And based on the discussion, it's a two-way street. Top down, we're talking policy, direction, framework, governance, investments for sure, the legal and regulatory environment. But bottom up as well, awareness, training, lifelong learning. I want to use more like Ahmed said, there's nothing artificial about it anymore. So it's not really AI in my mind, it's IA, it's intelligence augmentation rather than artificial intelligence. Having said that, I think the key thing here is try to maximize the human and business skills as opposed to the technical skills. We cannot compete with technology. I remember 22 years ago in Geneva, sitting in a round table like this with the presence of Vinton Cerf, who's known as the father of the internet. The guy was saying, you guys are interested and happy that, I don't know, 1 million or 2 people at the time using the internet. Wait and see when machines talk to each other through the internet. Interestingly, I didn't see Vinton from 1998 until November last year, 2019 in Vienna. And I went to him and I reminded him of that same phrase. I said, you were there? He said, of course I was there and I keep following you. And he goes, see, I wasn't nuts when I said that. And he's right. The machines are talking to each other. What is our role here? Looking at that, but more from a positive perspective and just reading the title of the roundtable, Inclusive Development and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Having said all what I said, I still think there is opportunity there. If I look at Ayman's shop and the venture lab, many of the startups coming through his cycles over the last few years are actually based on AI and focused on fintech. So fintech, if you look at it in a country like Egypt, 100 million people, only I think 10%, Islam can correct me here, 10% or 5% are banking their money. I think it's one of the lowest percentages in the world, not in the region. So if you look at that, using AI, it needs, of course, a regulatory environment. It needs so many of the stuff I just said, but still, it can create jobs. It can contribute to alleviating poverty. But more importantly, it can actually at least introduce some of the informal economy that we have into the system. So 2 very alarming numbers here. Only 10 to 12% are banking their money. And with all due respect with the government reports that says that the 30 or 35% of the economy is informal, I'm sorry, it's easy 80%. Easy 80%. So many of the institutions in Egypt are actually working on the unbanked segment. I know CIBs have a strategy. I know also the central bank is putting a lot of money in there. So more challenges, more opportunities, more solutions.
Thank you, Nagla. Congrats on the new center. Thank you, Dean Kamel, for the invitation. I want to give an industry perspective for the discussion. I work for CIB, and I'm leading the data science lab in CIB as the first data science in Egypt, maybe across Africa. And this data lab currently is globally ranked. It's one of the top 20s. And at the same time, it became a Harvard case last year, just recently. So whoever deciding to go for his MBA or his data science master, I'm part of their GPA in a couple of years from today. So I want to give another perspective because frankly, with the fourth industrial revolution, there are another business challenge because the current business model within the banking industry or any industry on earth currently under a severe challenge. In a bank like CIB, when we start investing in building the new capital, the new form of the capital, which is basically the data and information, we figure out that the value creation model is obsolete, we need to change it. And now when we announce, it's not a secret, when we announce our expansion model across Africa, we are expanding like a platform, not anymore M&As, not anymore acquiring operations overseas. We acquire 1 million customers over the past 45 years. This is the whole journey across this market. Our plan is to acquire 15, 20 million customers within the coming 15 years. And that will put a lot of challenge on the business school, on the research, on the researchers, on the empirical studies here in the business school, because the old pricing models is not working anymore for us. The targeting criteria and the old marketing textbook is not working anymore for us. The whole business models needs to be built around consumer consumption and the way we are targeting and acting. There is no one consumer surplus model. It is not anymore that triangle between the demand side and the P star. There is no one P star, by the way, in the new economics book. So there is new chapter in the economics book needs to be written. We need to move on the marketing side in a very quantitative manner. The skill set needs to be changed completely. I have a daughter which is 11 years. I haven't seen her textbook, the first textbook, I haven't seen it till today. And she's a coder, she's designing game. I haven't seen that textbook yet. So I think a lot of challenges. The regulators need to change the way they are thinking about the regulations in general. We need to reach and approach a situation when regulation and setting regulatory frameworks became experimental exercise, more of experimentation. We need to see sandboxes for the regulators rather than just issuing regulations. I think that's a big thing right now. Within the bank, I think the banks start discussing technology and IPs and acquiring technology IPs rather than acquiring branches. So that's a big change in the industry by itself and a big change in the way we create value. This bank will be a software company in 5-6 years from today. It will not be a bank anymore because the old way we creating value is generating for us 2-3% profit margins. While a small startup, any startup in Egypt or outside Egypt is creating 20-30 multiples a year. So I think a big emphasis on the value creation, the business model challenges, and I rely on the venture lab here in start building a new experimentation wave around this. It happened to be also a part of the Fourth Industrial Revolution initiative, part of the World Economic Forum. A big part of their agenda right now is the business model challenge rather than the EBCDs of the technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hisham. Thank you, Islam.
Just to go over some points I think that were missed out. So I think we're looking at a world now, I don't think the extent of what the Fourth Industrial Revolution is huge. So we're looking at a world already people are discussing a world with no work. So you have countries experimenting with universal pay, for example. You have Finland did it, and surprisingly also in Africa, we have Namibia and Kenya who have tried to experiment with universal basic income. So I think we have to be really careful. The other thing that comes to mind from what I've heard is, do we try to catch up or do we leapfrog something, right? So trying to talk about the informal economies and we're behind with industrialization, the kind of labor. There's a lot of material that says perhaps just leapfrog all that and go straight into the next stage. The other thing also which I thought needs mentioning is the type of skills that will be needed in the future. Not everybody has to know technology. So in fact, a lot of the new skills, according to most recent articles I looked at, we're talking about creativity, problem solving, cooperation. So there will be an elite that will of course be high tech, but not everybody will be able to compete in that. It will be less and less and less. Of course, education has come up many times, that goes without saying. I'm going to also, particularly for the MENA region, a huge issue for the future is trust and cooperation. And that's a huge problem we have in this region. So for example, when we look at online shopping, it's not doing very well in Egypt apparently. People don't trust it. Okay, it focuses to a small minority. So how are we going to trust beyond and beyond and beyond? Cooperation, I presented a paper dealing with crisis management. We don't cooperate very well with each other as a region, and that's going to be very, very important. Comparing to Africa, say, and development, we see, I seem to see a lot of development going on there. Other than the UAE, how much development is going on in the rest of the North Africa area? I'm not sure that much.
When we talk about India, numbers, numerically, we might have many similarities. But India is one of the only good thing, and I'm partly English, that the British did with their colonization in any part of the world was impose a good education system in India. So while we're all struggling with the whats and memorization, the Indians, not only do they have a huge IT industry, they created an IT cohort for export. We don't even have an IT industry here, a very small one at least. Directly to the MENA region, and I'll wrap up. I think we need to talk about, let's be realistic, bottom-up democracy, so I teach good governance. It's not going to happen. So we need to look at Singapore, responsible leadership. We need to look at, how really we can use this technology for development. So very, very important is information, right? Information can be an equalizer. But the real question is, do the people have the capacity to understand it, one? And two, will they have access to it to be empowered? So many countries in the developing world will not allow empowerment.
Thank you, Hisham. Okay, I have a list, which it's a great, vibrant discussion, so I'm moving on to make sure everybody gets a chance. I have Nada Shusha next.
Okay, just for background, I used to work for the International Finance Corporation, private sector arm of the World Bank. But my passion has been lately very much gender development, women development. So I personally believe that AI and all the application can really represent big tools for women development. It has potential to address challenges by the individual at the bottom of the pyramid of the income distribution and the bottom 40%. As IFC, we have invested in a number of these applications that has been going into, for example, delivering micro-lending, personalized tutoring, health diagnosis, medical advice. All these are tools that are allowing women to empower themselves and to grab on. And I think this is one of the big advantage if this is well done and looked. One of the advantage also is on the speech recognition and the speech-to-text functionalities, because they remove literally a literacy barrier typically encountered by the poorest individuals when accessing text-based application. So I think on women empowerment, AI is really can give the tools for women to grab them and to empower themselves. Just a last example is working with Flat 6 Labs, that is in the accelerator, and that has offices in the part of MENA. The country where there is the most application by women is Saudi Arabia, because it gives the opportunity for them to empower themselves, and entrepreneurship is one of the way of showing their, taking their career in their own hands.
Thank you, Nada.
Thank you.
Christine?
Thank you, Nagla. I'm Christine Arida, and I work for the National Telecom Regulatory Authority. And I'm not here to solve the problem of the internet at the Cairo University, like Ganel would wish, but I would like to bring in a couple of perspectives, since we're talking about inclusive development and since the point about digital divide has been brought to the table. So I think one of our main challenges is that many of the public and private sector in Egypt is still struggling with the third industrial revolution, not to speak about the fourth. So, so many are still looking into automation, digitization, computers, and the more you go to the bottom of the pyramids, the more you see the problem there. And this is where the problem of inclusiveness development will hit probably harder. So, but as many have said, the picture is not that dark because we've heard we are doing good on startups. We have many ideas in the region. We have youth, a lot of youth, abundance of youth that are tech savvy. And we have a population that is big, which means that we can have a lot of data. And what could happen to us if we don't really look forward and plan very carefully? We heard about the many issues you talked about, Nagla, the bias of data, sometimes caused maybe by legislations, but also by marketing decisions of companies that dominate the data. But also the availability of data, the free flow of it. Are we really looking at, as government policies, towards how to make this conducive for startups? We've heard startups talk. So I think everybody has talked about human capital, how important that is. I think one thing that may have not been brought too many on the table is the issue of trust. And I think that's very important to bring to the table, because if you don't have enough trust in the technology, you won't have an uptake. So let me quickly put an idea to the table. Maybe government should look at how to solve problems that are necessary for development by engaging youth and startups through putting money actually into collecting ideas, making people solve the problems with concrete solutions that they bring using AI, tech startups, things like that. Like, for example, solving problems of health or education through explicitly the startups. So changing the whole ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Deepak?
Now, I've been listening to, starting with Utkarsh and others. See, if you look at the concept of artificial intelligence, I don't think this is going to make human beings irrelevant. We need to change. By change, I mean we need to have a different set of skills. As I said yesterday, in business schools, we teach students how you learn to put structure on unstructured problems. Courses that are well structured can go online. Classroom should be more discussion. So the new set of skills should be how we harness the power of human intelligence. In our days, our teachers in schools used to spend a lot of time teaching us arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication. Calculators came. They didn't reduce the intelligence of the millennials. In fact, it's more challenging to teach them today than before. I think this is what Utkarsh said is a disruption for we deans, we business school teachers, that how we change and how we equip the new generation with a better set of skills, tools. I don't know whether you have faced this. After the internet came, people thought email has come and it would reduce the consumption of paper. In my office, the consumption has not reduced. The human beings are human beings. So my view of all this artificial intelligence, which I understand is real, is how we adapt ourselves to these changing circumstances and think about what type of skills we need to share with the new generation and make them more thoughtful, more critical, and prepare them for the new future. So I think that this is a challenge, but this challenge would, I think, make us all better. And I really believe the best of this world is ahead of us. So all these things are creating more efficiency in the system, more effective mechanisms, but what it would give us is a competitive edge to look for a brighter and a peaceful world. So I think we should embrace this and take this as an opportunity to excel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nashwa, تفضلي.
Thank you very much first for the invitation, and sorry to talk at the end of the discussion. Usually I like to listen more than to talk.
this makes it not easy to talk later because I think most of what I wanted to say is already said, but at least I just would like to share with you very few thoughts. I'm working with Nile University. I'm a professor with Nile University, which is mainly for research and scientific education and also undergraduate educations. And later, last 5 to 6 years, we have started some programs with big data, data sciences, and things in the direction. And I think it's very much successful, I think. We have produced a lot of students. They have finished their studies with us. Our students, they come from every sector in this country, let's say, from banking, from industry, from IBM, from many companies and sectors. And the main point with that they really could get good study, and after that they leave the university to either to the job or to somewhere else. The main point I'm talking about now here is how to keep these brains, because the brains are the valuable assets in this process. Of course, we have 3 dimensions we have to think about: data, availability, and integrity to work with the AI world, which is not that so easy to find enough data, and that data is integrated and can be worked together. The human capacity or the skills that you would like to build, and these skills we have to start, as we have all said, from the school up to whatever the level of study that we want to approach. And the third is how to integrate these brains together. So I think if there is one single key for the door to the future, it should be collaboration. I think collaboration is a very important factor to be added to this table between different sectors: the academia, the industry, of course the community, because community also has to be a very important component. I think some here has discussed the community as a partner to be shared or to be consulted in building that future. This has to be taken into consideration. Thank you very much. Don't want to make it longer than that.
Thank you very much. Now I have returning speakers, participants, Ayman and Marwan. I'll ask you to be brief, please, before we have a round of closing remarks. So Ayman and then Marwan.
Thank you so much, Nagla. I just wanted to bring the conversation back to what's happening on the ground in Egypt and how do we participate or become a participant in all what's happening around us. A lot of people talk about startups because startups are always perceived as this is the way you enter into new technologies. And I see pretty much a big part of the startup pipeline in Egypt. Reality is there are very few, if any, startups who come from an AI background. And the reason for that is there are 2 things. First, if you want to do something in AI feeds on data. And there's very little in terms of actual usable data that we have here. Where is the data? So that's the question. The data sits with large corporates, banks, telcos, medical labs, and the like, or with the government in terms of national databases. Some of them may be even archaic. Some companies like CIB are very advanced. Vodafone, the telcos usually, and some of the banks, they have good data infrastructure, but they're keeping it internally for good reasons, privacy, legal, regulatory reasons. The government, the same thing. Some agencies do have good databases, but few of them, and it's also closed. So unless we figure out a way where some individuals, companies, startups can have access to these data in some controlled environments, I don't think there's going to be much of an AI industry in Egypt. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, if you want to take an application, you need to monetize, figure out a way to monetize. How do you monetize? It's the platforms. So we don't own the major platforms, and a lot of the growth of the platforms is happening all over the country. If we look at even local platforms like the telcos and the banks, those are platforms to monetize, to offer something, take some money. Most of them are not at a stage to be able to work with you. So what's happening is we really don't have the ability or the infrastructure to build an AI industry here. We have some brains. Not many, but we do have some brains. But the brains try and then they are not able. So once they get something that looks like an interesting model, it flies away somewhere else. So that's a big challenge. And unless we figure out the whole data and the whole monetization part, I don't see much that's happening in terms of our participation until that logic is embedded somewhere in a platform that we inherit and use as end users at the end with all the biases and all the issues that's in it. So that's a big challenge.
Thank you, Ayman. Marwan, tfaddal.
I just had a comment. I didn't know whether it's going to be mentioned, but it didn't, so I'd like to point it out. And something doesn't apply to Nagla and her team. The point is, in the Arab world, women outperform boys, or in schools, and at universities, and yet we go out in the labor market and we find that the women participation is really low. Now, in your invitation, you asked us to point out opportunities. And this is a major opportunity. There is the most, the most educated, most capable segment of the society is usually gets very quickly sidelined. We invest in their basic education, we invest in their higher education, and then they go sit at home and they don't do much. So the opportunity here is how can we tap into this sector of the segment of the society and get them more into the fourth industrial revolution, because even socially and whatever, you can do a lot these days. I mean, this is a controversial point, but women can do things while they're staying at home. They can do work from home if it is a social, if they have to be at home and if they have to be with the family, they still can do a lot. So this is, I think, an important point that everybody has to take in consideration, because it's ready. They're out there. If we want inclusive development, if we want to have AI systems that are aware of inclusivity, if women are involved, they're much more attuned to the biases that may be in the systems, etc. But it's just like a point I thought.
Thank you, Marwan. We have a follow-up from Nada please.
Yeah, on that one, because one point I wanted to make was that data helps also the empowerment of women, because, when you have the data, I work on two programs. One is banking on women and one women on board. And collecting the data from banks in the region, yes, again, bank is the depository, but when you look at the disintegrated data, you find out that, in fact, women are save more, default less, buy more products, and are more profitable, right? So, right. So when we discuss with then bankers or chairmen, usually men, you have a business argument. It is not anymore a CSR, a corporate social responsibility, but you have the data to prove it. Similarly, for women on boards, the IFC published 3 studies, one for Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan, and on the 3 companies that had women on boards had higher returns on equity, higher returns on assets. So having the data to prove your point is very helpful.
Thank you very much, Nad. I think on this note, I will ask Leslie. We'll go in the opposite, turns. So Leslie, if I may ask you if you'd like to give a few closing remarks, just in a couple of minutes, and then we'll have Rawhiya, Sally, and Utkarsh.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, again, has been spoken about is the role of education. And I agree with Marwan that by the time we're in university, maybe already too much has been set in place. And I think it's important that we address these at a very, very grassroots level and at a primary level and more broadly at the community level, because kids learn at home and in their community well before they go into formal education. And yet, as Michael pointed out, we have this appendage that is now making decisions for us left, right, and center, to the point of parenting. I hate to be a parent these days because so much of those ideas are being fed into the family directly. And so we need to be very thoughtful about who get to make decisions about the technology that we use in all settings, not just in educational technology, but in all aspects of our daily life, including education all the way up. So I think teachers and educators have an important role to play in this, and that those who design technology, AI in particular, needs to be working with people who know their business in education and in community building, and build those ideas in the technology from the ground up rather than wait for something to go wrong and try to fix it, and which is our approach right now, to fix deficiency rather than build an enhancement from the ground up based on knowledge that we have already.
Thank you, Leslie. Rawhiya, would you like to take a minute or two to give final remarks?
Thank you. First off, I want to speak to Nada's point about transparency in the black box, and I'm taking off my hat as a program officer at IDRC because I'm going to make a political point, which is that black box and transparency with AI and algorithms is impossible once a country signs a trade agreement with a country that is the originator of that algorithm. And it's very important that any decision maker around this table realize, again, I'm saying this as a political scientist, that the only international relations that has teeth are trade agreements. And trade agreements trump, I hate that word, but they are more important than anything. So just be aware that once you sign a trade agreement with a large state, that they will have that control. My second point is around knowledge and the knowledge commons. I feel like for all those who publish papers around this table, please make sure that your work is open access, because the knowledge commons are what we have in the future as humans, and that needs to be free. We need to liberate our knowledge. And my third point is I just recently moved to Jordan, to the Middle East, and it's really wonderful to come to a forum like this and to hear so many amazing voices and ideas, and it's really exciting, and I really thank you for the invitation. And I see lots of women out in the audience, and I would love to hear more of your voices. And that's no offense to all of the brain trusts around this table, but anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rahia. Sally, would you like to make closing remarks?
Thank you. I just knew that Ayman was going to bring up regulation, and I should have been more prepared. But I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, it's a problem that the whole world is grappling with. We just don't understand this thing enough to be able to regulate it. And as Ayman rightly pointed out, regulation always lags behind the fact. So I attended an event at the WIPO a few months ago, which is the United Nations body for intellectual property. And they were still trying to figure out who actually owns not just the data, but the algorithms and the products. And if someone uses IBM Watson to create an AI system that then produces a new product, who actually owns the product, who has the rights to it? I have and I feel Miguel's pain, because even though he's very apprehensive about technology and its effects and the lack of regulation, I sit next to the US envoys to various international organizations when I attend those meetings, and they are the first ones to oppose any kind of regulation on AI, because it will stifle their innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem. So there's always this dichotomy of where do you start and who gets more priority. And I've developed kind of a cynical approach to regulation, and I think I don't have the answer, but I think the first thing is education. Our regulators need to be more educated, which takes me to the point of the most important function in a world of AI is called the domain expert. And the domain expert is someone who's not a data scientist, who's not a technologist. It's someone who works in any walk of life, but understands the technology and its impact on what they do and the opportunities it affords. And one subgroup of that are the regulators, who really need to be given enough understanding of the technology to be able to regulate it. And kind of pointing my finger back at myself, saying, and those like me, I think this outreach needs to start from us, needs to start from people who have some understanding of the technology. We need to be the one doing the outreach and educating more. Thank you.
Thank you. Utkarsh?
Thank you. I have 5 short points: data colonialism, reinvention, lifelong learning, jobs, and poets. So I'll try and summarize them in 1 minute, 50 seconds. I think as we march into the future, data colonialism will be real. Who owns the data? A few corporates and a few governments, and will they hoard it to themselves, or will they find a balance to do it? I think one tangible measure is if people are allowed to sell their data. These 7 billion people, I'm throwing it as a controversial idea. If you're allowed to sell your data and monetize it at your own will, there might be a reason. The second is reinvention. You will have to reinvent yourself multiple times over and over again, and you can't do it alone. You have to either build a community or be part of it. The third is lifelong learning. I studied engineering, then did liberal arts, then did an MBA, and now I'm heading to Oxford as a Chevening Fellow, and I'm 30. I'm not telling you that I love collecting degrees, but the fact is that people will have to study and pick out relevant things to figure out where they want to mold their talent with the opportunities. Jobs, the new kinds of jobs will be not the jobs that we see today. Today, being a TikTok star or an Instagram star or this and that is real. Why? Because people are building communities and monetizing them by putting a layer on top of it. We may not like it. We may not consider these jobs as particularly intellectually stimulating, but try and visit China once and see what kind of models are you experiencing there. And most importantly, the world needs more poets. As we march into the future, everyone doesn't need to be a data scientist, but everyone does need to be a data literate. As we are trying to redefine how we live, who we live with, how we engage with different kinds of societies, it's the poets and the philosophers who will need to work with the scientists to figure out a new model. Everyone doesn't need to be a data scientist, but everyone does need to be a data literate as long as there are enough poets in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I will make very quick comments in hopefully less than 2 minutes. Thank you for mentioning open access and access to knowledge, because that's what we're all about at the center, access to knowledge for development, but it's development. And we look at the board, inclusive development. Inclusive development, SDGs, being agile, conscious effort at using the technology to mitigate the threats and hopefully increase the promise and utilize the promise. Black boxes over black boxes, biases over biases, reflecting real life biases as if what's biased in the data and the algorithm is not enough. They tend to amplify real life biases. How do we turn things around? How do we mitigate that by using the technology for us rather than using it against the wellness of the people? At the end of the day, it is about humanizing the technology, humanizing the data, understanding what is happening on the ground. Grounds up and not top down, not imposed, not using ready-made yardsticks, but actually capturing what's happening on the ground, collecting data in innovative ways. In my research, I look at Rays of Hope as startups and entrepreneurial initiatives, the youth, the positive results that are coming from the youth and the women, and all the achievements that are actually happening, contrary to what we are scared of using the technology. So we continue to be hopeful and positive to use the technology for inclusive development. What remains for me is to thank you all so very much. Wonderful group of speakers, participants, collaborators, and everyone in the room. And I want to thank again Dean Kamel, my associate dean, also Samer Atallah, and Dean Sharif Kamel, and the whole team at the School of Business and the Access to Knowledge for Development for a wonderful panel. Thank you all so very much. Please join me. Okay, I am reminded that we will have a group picture outside, so may I ask everybody to step out around the table for a group picture. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I also Yes, I saw.
Thank you.